Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 40. I'm Enigmius, and today we're continuing with the Serpovectem build, pretty much where we left off in the last episode. We're focusing largely on the transition between these wings that we added recently and the main hull, and getting everything lined up so that everything looks as natural and organic as possible. Not necessarily, we're not trying necessarily to make it look plain or the word just, I had it in my head and then it jumped out just before I got to say it and now I can't remember. We're not necessarily trying to make it so that you don't really think about this transition. I don't mind if there's some stuff going on like we did on the underside where it's got some additional mass to it in various different places that sort of draws a little bit of attention to that transition. Realistically speaking, we can do whatever we want, but what we have to be very careful about is whatever we do has to line up with the rest of the hull, because if we get the transition wrong, it doesn't matter what we've got going on in between the wing and the hull, it's just going to look wrong. And it's one of those particular areas where if you do it right, the eye passes over it, maybe they see some, something interesting, and then they just move on. If you do something wrong, the eye goes there and they won't leave. The eyes are just stuck there. And I don't want that sort of situation for a build that, as we've kind of discovered, there's a lot of curves, there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of things that are kind of interesting that we've already put in place and that we will be putting in place that deserve a little bit of attention as well. So we want to make sure that we just don't create the eyesore kind of situation that undermines everything else that we've been looking at. So you can see I just highlighted a bunch of blocks and removed them. I noticed that there are times when you delete blocks, and especially when you delete large numbers of blocks, where that little red checker sort of pattern just sits there for a really long time. It won't go away. And it's there to show you the blocks that you just erased, which is useful. Because sometimes you might not even realize. There have been times in the past where I had forgotten that I had a block selected when I selected a bunch of others, and then I deleted the whole group, and if it weren't for that little checkerboard sort of pattern, I wouldn't have necessarily realized that I'd unintentionally deleted something that I wanted to keep. So I appreciate why it's there. I just wish that sometimes it would go away a little bit sooner. Now, this is one of those parts of the build where I place a bunch of stuff and then I take it away, and then I place a bunch more stuff and then I take it away, and then I rework some stuff and then I take it away, and you get the idea. It's a challenging area because in large part when I was working in this area, sort of getting things taken care of with the wings and all that other stuff, and then starting to work on these transitions, I inadvertently removed a lot of the blocks that were used to mark the profile for the outer side of the hull. It makes it a little bit tricky to kind of decide where we have to place things so that they line up with that side of the hull when we've actually put it in place, and it kind of slows me down. Another thing, and you can see it here and you'll see it sort of progress as we go, is this sort of step-like structure that we end up with, where we have like a slope and then a flat section and then a slope and then a flat section. In games where the blocks are all a specific size and you don't get to choose with much liberty how large you want them to be and how they line up and all those other things, the way that we can with this game, sometimes it's necessary to have those step-like structures as part of creating a slope that's a different angle than the natural angles of the blocks that you're working with. So for example, if you've got blocks that line up together with one another to make a 22.5-degree slope, and you want a 15-degree slope, you have to have some sort of stepping in there to stretch things out a little bit in order to create that illusion of a line that's of a different angle. In this game, that's not the true kind of situation that we find ourselves in. If we're creating a stepped sort of structure like you can see now, there's usually a way to adjust it so that it's not stepped anymore. There's probably something that you can do to rework things, but quite often, for me anyways, I'm not able to visualize in my head in extreme detail how things are going to look before they're done. I can create in my head a general idea of the way that I want things to look and the way I expect them to look based on the geometry and the blocks that we're using and all of the different things that we have control over. But what's in my head and what shows up in the game is quite frequently a little bit different from one another. And it's very, very important at that point that I have things in the game to help me line things up and to make sense of what's going on, so that I don't have that stepped nightmare in the background. So I decided to take a little bit of a break from that area because I'd spent so much time working and reworking it, and I decided to spend a little bit of time building in the hull immediately ahead of the wing on the side, from the side profile up to the top profile. The first step, of course, is creating the curve that we want that structure to follow. And then once we've got the curve roughed in, we've got a rough profile, then we can fill it in, as we do with pretty much everything, more refined shapes, get everything sort of looking a little bit more uniform, a little bit more natural. And then we can continue on from there. We've got the side profile, we've got the top profile, and we've got the rear profile that we can build against. And between the three of them, we find ourselves in a situation where the blocks just basically define their own sort of parameters, the sizes, the shapes, the orientations. You don't have to think a whole lot about it. The only time you have to think about it is if you look at it after you've gone through a few strips. So you notice we're working in sort of strips here. You place a few of those and you realize that things are just going a little bit wonky. You don't have a uniform sort of structure. Things are sort of sagging in areas or they're bulging in areas. It just happens. Sometimes it's the way it is. In this case, it actually goes together pretty well. I was quite pleased with how quickly and easily everything just started to fit together. There's a few benefits to this that you might not necessarily even think of. One is it's a victory. We've spent all this time working on the wing and not necessarily getting angry or discouraged or anything like that, but there's a certain point where you just start to run out of ideas and you feel like you're just removing and placing things without actually having an idea in mind of what you're going for. You're just hoping that the next time you take something away and put something in its place, it's going to work better than before, which is not necessarily... Sometimes it ends up working out that way, but it's not necessarily the most productive way, for me at least, to go about things for very long. There's a threshold, and when I cross it, I realize I'm just probably wasting time. So we get a bit of a victory in the sense that this is working. We're starting to feel better about things. Everything's coming together a little bit more, working in a different area of the ship, thinking about different things, not necessarily fixated on the same problem, etc., etc. Additionally, because we're bringing this hull down to the side from the top down, or in this case, we're basically going from the side and working our way up, but the end result is the same. We've got the side of the ship is starting to take shape in the area where we're working on that transition, which makes it much, much easier when we're looking at it to say, okay, well, this is the area specifically that I'm working with, and I can place things in here and get a general idea of the finished look. We aren't sort of second guessing ourselves and trying to make things line up with maybes. We've got the blocks right there that we can work with and get a much better idea of what's working and what's not, and what we have to work with, the space, the areas that we're working with the geometry. Everything is making a lot more sense because we've got this part of the hull is starting to fill in. We've still got kind of a mess down in that corner, that little transition. We've got the stepped sort of lumpy mess, but it's making a lot more sense, and it's not going to be very long at all before we'll be able to head down there and start making some fairly aggressive modifications. And it's one of those situations where now everything just sort of works in our mind, in the space that we're working with, the geometry, everything just sort of comes together so that it goes together very, very quickly, and we end up with something that we're happy with. So not necessarily always the best way to approach it. If you look at the entire process, from all of the time spent mucking about, removing, replacing, etc., etc., changing things, working in different areas of the ship, coming back, working in this area a little bit more, filling in more of the ship, and then coming back and finally getting the shape right. In a perfect world, we would have got it right the first time and we would have been able to move on, but it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect for me. Maybe it'll be perfect for you at some point, and you will be the guru of 3D manipulation and games like this, and that will be fantastic. I'll be very happy for you. But for me, it's never going to be perfect. So I try and focus on keeping things in perspective. It doesn't have to be more than it needs to be. You can see that front section, we just wiped out the whole thing, and watch how quickly the replacement is going to go into place here. Nicely lined up with the side of the hull, nicely following the contours of the wings, doing everything that we needed to do and not taking all day to do it. We ended up where we wanted to be eventually, even if the process that got us there was a little bit messy and a little bit time consuming and a little bit repetitious. By the time we get this all sorted out, I'm actually pretty happy with the way that it did turn out, because we do have that sort of transition in there where there's a little bit of extra mass, there's a little bit of something going on. Just in the process of recording the commentary for this specific video, I came up with some additional ideas for this particular area that could be kind of interesting, that we'll probably be putting in place. Not major changes or major additions, but just kind of minor things that come to mind, and you say that would not only be kind of neat, I think, but also not difficult to do. So we'll be revisiting this part of the ship to a certain extent in the very near future to take care of that. But it's just everything is coming together so much easier now. I decided after I got that sort of transition underway that I wanted to spend a little bit more time working on this top section of the hull, directly above the wing, and kind of working our way back. And the reason is basically just because we haven't spent a whole lot of time on the hull itself. We've spent some time on it, but relative to the amount of time that we have to spend in order to get it all filled in, we haven't really spent a lot of time at all. And I noticed as I was placing these blocks right here specifically, they weren't lining up properly with profile blocks that I had placed before. You can see that they're sticking up a little bit, just a tiny bit. Not even the smallest block size that you can get is a certain height. It's not even that high. It's just this little wee tiny strip. And I originally was looking at it and I was thinking, you know, it's not that bad. It looks kind of interesting. But those shadows that it makes, they're kind of like scorch marks wherever the blocks don't line up properly, kind of make them look a little bit more than they are. Sometimes I think it can add visual interest. It kind of accentuates these slight differences that you might otherwise overlook. But in this case, I was looking at it and I was thinking, man, it just makes it look like I missed. That's the whole thing. It makes it look like I missed. And I was trying to think of a quick and easy way to solve it by changing the blocks that I had just placed in order to get them to line up better. And I realized I don't have to. I can actually remove those profile blocks that I placed and realign those to the blocks that I had just recently placed so that they line up properly, and everything will be golden. We'll have everything lined up so that it looks natural and organic, following the curves as we would like them to. Easy. It's not going to be a big deal at all. So we're making good progress. I've got a couple of structural elements that I would like to add to the ship. Not huge necessarily, but when I've got this list in my head that says we're going to do this, this, and this, and maybe this, we're on the this and this category of things that are definitely going in. But they won't take too long. So once we get a little bit more of the hull filled in, we'll work on that as well. Finish the transition, make sure everything is working that way. There's a possibility that the ship may get much larger, but I think I would kind of like to play around with it when it's close to what it is now in terms of size. I don't really want to get too much bigger right away necessarily, but there's the option at some point in the future that it'll be sort of an expansion to keep in mind. But other than that, you know, we've got to get obviously the important stuff stuck inside the ship, and then we'll fly around and test it for a little while. So we're making good progress, and it's not going to be too much longer before we have another completed ship that's available as a blueprint for you guys. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes of the series, easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys. I take care.